I'm Jo Facer. I'm the head of the MPQ faculty at the National Institute of Teaching, and I'm really excited to be speaking to Becca Jenkins today. We're going to be talking about how she prepared to take on her latest leadership role, which is deputy head teacher role in a school in Wales. Becca, do you want to tell us a little bit about your career to date? What has brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thanks for that lovely welcome, Jo. It's an absolute privilege to be here. This is my first deputy headship in a school in Wales. And my experience to date, my most recent in-school experience was a startup school in Oldham, an Oasis Academy, that we started with just a year 7 and grew from there. And prior to that, I worked in lots of different schools as a head of maths and as a maths teacher, and also had lots of experience working abroad in the international school sector, and had a year working at an international school in Wales called Atlantic College, which is quite an interesting model. If anybody hasn't seen this school before, it is a private school, but it has an interesting model in terms of how the less advantaged students access the funding to attend the school. It's a UWC college, and I got to teach the IB curriculum there, IB maths. So that was fantastic. So yes, up until last year, I was an assistant head teacher at an Oasis Academy in Oldham, and then had a brilliant year's experience. I was seconded by Oasis to work for the National Institute of Teaching and helped set up their South and West region. And I've gone back into school, moved back to the land of my fathers to Wales to become a deputy head for the first time, which is brilliant, really exciting.
That's really interesting. So, because I think two things really strike me. One is that you've not always worked in the state sector, and I think there's a sense that once you move to an international school or a private school, it's really hard to move back to the state sector. So I'd love to hear your take on that, because you've obviously done both. And of course, leaving schools for a year. No, it sounded like that's sort of Oasis's idea. But so tell me about that. What made you choose to leave the state sector and choose to leave teaching for that year?
Yeah, really good question. I think it was I trained to be a teacher via the Teach First programme, and I trained in a really brilliant school in Manchester. I did 2 years at a school in Manchester, and had always been really excited by the idea of living and working abroad. I always had that idea in my head, and there was an opportunity that arose to work in Spain. And so I went to work for the British Council School as a maths teacher in Madrid, which was fantastic. It meant that I got to practice my Spanish and learn about another culture and learn about another education system, because that school and my other international school experiences have been international schools that are kind of embedded in the state sector of that school. So this school, whilst it was an international school and it was fee paying, it had the Spanish system woven into it. So sixth form students, for example, would study A levels and the bachillerato at the same time. So it meant that I got to work with Spanish maths teachers to see how we kind of weave the curriculums together, which is really interesting. So yeah, it was kind of selfishly driven in the first instance to enable myself to live and work abroad. And I ping-ponged a little bit, I'll be totally honest. I then went back to work in the state sector, moved back home, and then decided I wanted another stint abroad and got to live in France for a year. And that was with another international school within a state lycée in France. So it's a really interesting school if anybody wants to look it up. It has an international English national programme where students who have elected to learn their maths and other subjects in English get to study GCSEs and A levels in English alongside their French baccalaureate. So they are kind of doubling up on their studies. And the history of that school is quite interesting because it was set up by the families of Cern. It's very close to Geneva on the Swiss border. And so it was set up in the 60s as an option for those international workers in Cern, the particle accelerator, to send their kids and to allow them to have access to an English system as well as the French system. And so again, it was fascinating because I got to work alongside French-speaking maths teachers who were teaching the French national curriculum, which brought a whole other perspective to how I now teach maths, because it's a lot of the pedagogy is quite different in France and in other places that I've taught. So
can you say a bit more about, like, what do you think you've kind of, what did you most gain from those international experiences that sort of shapes your teaching and your leadership today?
Yeah, really good question. I think the main thing is the open-mindedness for collaboration, because the schools that I've worked in the international context have been all about bringing different national pedagogical strategies together to try and make a version of both. And for example, in the French system, it was really interesting to see how the school system there doesn't have as much an emphasis on the pastoral side of the role of schools. That's kind of separate from the role of a teacher, and they employ other people to take on that kind of pastoral role. And it's not seen as something the teacher does, whereas I've seen the massive benefit to our system in the UK, where the teacher does take on more of the pastoral role, and how that supports the teaching and learning in the classroom if you really build that excellent relationship with students through the pastoral route. But in the French system, it's much more about the traditional teaching and learning, or it certainly was an experience I had in that lycée.
Okay, and just, I guess, what made you make the decision? So you had like a year out, and I think the profession at the moment is sort of hemorrhaging teachers, and lots of people are wanting to leave, and you're kind of swimming against the tide. You're like, I'm coming back in. What made you choose to go back to schools this year?
I think sometimes you don't know how good something is until you leave it. And I knew that what I loved most was being in the classroom and being with students. And the opportunity within Oasis was something that was such a once in a lifetime opportunity. I felt like it had to be, I had to really go for it, 2 feet in. But I really missed being in the classroom, and I worked that out quite early on. I do thrive off the relationship that you build with students and staff, and there's nothing like the school environment for having the best stories at the end of the day, and just never ever not having anything to do. And that's not to say that other roles or other jobs aren't fulfilling and rewarding, but for me, I get so much more a kind of a sense of purpose from being with the children, that I think you can only really get that when you're in school for most of your time, which is the main reason I came back, to be with the kids.
And it's really fascinating you say that about being with the children, because I think that some people have this perception of the upper levels of senior leadership as getting further and further away. I know some people say, I don't know if I want to become an assistant head or a deputy head, because I love the children, I love being in the classroom. Can you talk a bit about what that looks like in your day-to-day as a deputy head?
Yeah, really good question. I think what it looks like on a more senior level is you don't get that kind of everyday exposure to teaching simultaneous equations to X number of classes. But what you do get is, the real privilege of seeing other teachers develop those relationships, because you're in and out of lessons all the time. You still develop those relationships with students, because if you're a visible leader, you're constantly walking the corridors, constantly having conversations, constantly on the phone to parents, meeting with families. And so there is the other side of leadership, which, although you might not be kind of day to day in the classroom as much, or your own classroom, you're still in many other classrooms, and you still get to see the kind of holistic version of what schools are about as well, because you're engaging with many of the stakeholders. So you get to see a more rounded picture about what schools can do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so when you were thinking about where, you going back in schools, what made you choose this particular role and this particular school?
Good question. So it's partly kind of personally driven. We've been wanting to move back to Wales for a while. I haven't lived in Wales for a long time now, and I have a 3-year-old. and I would like for Jack to go to a Welsh speaking school. I went through the Welsh speaking system myself, and so I'd really like Jack to become bilingual too. And so now that he's 3, we're getting to the point where it would be really useful to be in the place where he can go to school. So that was partly that reason. It was kind of geographically where there was a Welsh primary school that we could send him to. So that dictated it slightly. But also, having visited the school and met most of the teachers on the interview day and on the visit, I felt there was a really good fit there in terms of what my previous experience had been and what the needs of the school were. I felt that I had something to offer that would really benefit the school. So I did feel, yeah, that the skill set that was needed was a good match.
And so when you saw this role come up and you were like, I'm going to apply for that, what was the preparation that you started then? Or did you start once they called you to interview? I guess it's usually quite a tight turnaround, isn't it?
Yeah, good question. So it started off, I saw the job advertised, and there was a note on the job advert about having an informal conversation with the head, which is often there. You know, I always try and speak to the head regardless of whether that offer is there, because that just gives you a good indication about whether, especially if you're going to be working closely with somebody, you know, just having that honest conversation about what the role will entail, what the needs of the schools are, is it going to be a good fit just from that first conversation. And so that was the first port of call. I spoke to the head and he talked me through the kind of school journey so far and his journey into the school and where they were at. And it seemed like a really good fit. And so I asked to come and visit the school, which the head made me feel very welcome. And I went for the day just to have a bit of a look around and to meet staff and to go into lessons, and, you know, got a really good feel of the place. And again, like I said before, felt like I could bring something that was needed, and then applied. And after the application process, then there was the interview. The interview was a really good and honest experience for me. And I say honest because the head teacher made it really, really apparent that everybody who was being interviewed that day could wander into any lesson. You know, we were all very welcome. It was open door policy, and we could see the school kind of warts and all, which I thought was really open and honest, and not always my experience of everything I've been to, if I'm honest. And I liked that because I felt like there was nothing that was trying to be hidden. And then everybody who's being interviewed got to have a conversation separate from the interview process with the head to talk about kind of what our next steps would be if we got the role. That was part of it. And I had a really positive experience from the whole day. Not just in terms of the staff, but this is an LA school, which meant I got to meet the governing body, and it was really positive in terms of how the appetite for change was coming across. I felt like everybody wanted to go on an improvement journey, and yeah, the fit seemed really good, and luckily they agreed, so that's why I'm here.
And it's always really hard, isn't it? Because sometimes appointments to positions happen a really long time before you take up post, and then you're doing your last role. But I think for everyone who gets particularly a very senior leadership role in a new school, it's hard to not think through what you're going to do next. So did you put that out of your head, or did you feel like you did a bit of preparation in the evenings and on the side for this new role? And if you did do preparation, what did that look like?
Yeah, good question. I think it's inevitable that you're going to have that in your head. You know, I was given the role at the beginning of May, and so, you know, that is quite a long time to kind of stew and and to obviously focus on the role that you've got to complete, and also mentally get yourself ready for, you know, a big role. This is, you know, a step up for me. And so my approach was to, where I could, go and visit the school again. And so there were 2 opportunities where I could go and be there for. One was a kind of a more formal induction with other new members of staff, and then the other was to be part of a really useful day, which is a great idea from the head, where I got to meet every single department as a department, and they would, you know, it is essentially a meeting to talk about what's going well and an even better if for the department. And so it was a really good use of one day where I got to know every team and their foci and what they thought was important before I started. And that was a really good quick win in terms of getting to know the lay of the land. Obviously, over the 6-week holiday, there were numerous occasions where I was invited in to support with different things. So we had an A-level results day and a GCSE results day, and I supported the head either side of those days with a bit of preparation and planning. But I think my advice would be not to jump in with both feet yet in terms of affecting or writing about any change until you've seen it day to day and what the real priorities need to be. Because something that I've learned is that I think I maybe did go in a bit too feet first over the summer holidays in terms of trying to get things ready and talk about things that needed to happen from September. But really, now that I've been here for a few weeks, I realise that other things are a priority. So it's a balance to be struck between, being supportive of the rest of the SLT and, being reactive to things that happen, depending on the results day and depending, if you get a member of staff who's supposed to join who then can't join. A lot of things happen over the 6-week holidays, and being supportive and bringing your skills and your experience to that. But you are a new member of staff and you want to affect change, but it has to be based on the evidence as you've gathered it as well, and being ready to not rush into things would be my advice.
Can you give me an example of something that you were sure was going to be a priority that you've, like, in the last 3 weeks have realised actually this is the thing?
Yeah, good question. I think so. One thing that has been a priority and has been flagged in terms of the leadership of the school, and I mean all leadership, heads of department, is having a really robust development plan for each department. And that has been something that has been an ongoing conversation between the heads of department and SLT and the head. And it's been kind of a drawn out process to get these development plans in. And having looked at them over the summer, I was on board with the idea that this is something that needed to happen as soon as possible, because it was something that was asked for before the summer, and then reflecting on the results, it needed to be enacted and improved upon. But now, having been at school and seeing day to day what's happening in classrooms, the thing that needs to be prioritized is the teaching and learning in the classrooms, and making sure that department leads take take real ownership of their areas to make sure that the teaching and learning is the best it possibly can be in every classroom. And that's what time should be spent on, and maybe not the paperwork at this stage. The paperwork is important. It's important there's a plan, but the priority at the moment is well structured, well planned lessons that lead to good progress, and boots on the ground, seeing that happening as an SLT member and as a department lead.
That's really fascinating. So it's almost like you got all the stuff you could get out of the paper and the couple of visits, but actually being on the ground day to day, you got a different perspective on priorities.
That's it. Yeah, it really changes it. And the other one is, when I came for my visits and looking at a lot of the documentation about the school, you wouldn't think that there would be much need for a kind of revamp of the behaviour for learning policy. But actually, being in lessons and speaking to staff, low-level disruption is an issue, and we need to address that head on. And if we don't address it head on, nothing else is going to improve, because that's a slippery slope. So yeah, that's another one that you might not know until you've been in it and lived it for a few weeks.
Yeah. And so just tell me, how have the first few weeks of this job been? You still happy you made the big move?
Yes, I'm really happy. It's busy. I will not lie. There's plenty to do. It's the first few weeks were daunting because I'm also the DSL here, and it's my first time as a DSL. So I had to be trained over the summer to make sure I was first of all able to do the role, and then I had to speak to a lot of people who know the systems of this local authority and this school to make sure that I was getting all of that right. And there are some really challenging situations in our school, and lots of high need families that require my time as a DSL as well. And so that has been a challenge, because previously my role was kind of purely teaching and learning, whereas we've got quite a small school here. And so the reality is that senior leaders do a little bit more of everything, because that's the way the leadership has been distributed. And so I have found that challenging, but I think it was always going to be a bit of a shock to the system for me, because I haven't done that before. But I am happy now with the systems. I know what we're doing, and we've got a really brilliant team of kind of deputy DSLs as well. So I've learned quickly that delegation is really important with the DSL role, because the volume of inquiries and investigations that I was undertaking in the first 2 weeks, well, it could have been my full-time job. So yeah. I've learned how important that delegation is there. But because it was the first time I was doing it, you feel like, well, I'm the DSL, so I need to be doing this. I need to be calling that parent. I need to speak to that external agency, but actually it's not manageable. So that's been quite a big learning curve. And now the kind of the strategic work, now that kind of operational piece is, I'm happy with that. We can start the improving teaching and learning.
And so one of the things that I think takes a long time when you start at a new school is building the relationships. You can't just, like in your old school, you could have sort of stormed in and been like, this is a great idea, and people might have listened to you. Whereas, like you say, you're taking a bit of time to see the lay of the land. How are you like building those relationships and securing buy-in to changes that need to be made?
Yeah, it is different. And I think you have to invest the time and go out of your way to have those conversations, go into the staff room and sit down with people who you don't know, make sure that you've had that one-to-one conversation with everybody. I've tried to make a point of that, so that, you know, and that you know something about everybody, because everybody wants to feel valued, and everybody wants to have that relationship with you as well. And the staff here are really open to getting to know you and having that kind of relationship. And they also really want to be listened to in terms of what they feel needs to improve. You know, there's a lot of things that need improving here, and they have been on a journey themselves, and they know the context much better than me, of course. And so being really ready to listen, I think, is important, because already I've had such a similar conversation with so many staff about what high expectations should look like in this school, and how you know when it's going well. And some of them describe a feeling of, you know, we felt like we were nearly there a few years ago or a few months ago, whatever, and they feel like it's been lost a little bit. And you know, you as a leader, you've just got to listen to that and take it all on board, so that you have to feed, you know, all your information gathering and your evidence gathering, but it's a way in with staff then, because they obviously feel listened to, and you can say, well, that's a really good idea. Would you be happy to share that in your department, or speak to me in the head about this, because that sounds like a no-brainer, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's having those kind of informal chats with people about what they're about and who they are, but also listening to them about where they feel the school should go and what needs to happen.
No, that's a really great method. And it sounds like between all of the things that you've been doing in the last few weeks, like it's full on. And you mentioned, you know, you have a 3-year-old, and I think a lot of people thinking about the next step in leadership are anxious about, you know, can I balance being a present parent and having a very demanding leadership role? So how are you managing that balance?
Yeah, it's the question. It's the perennial question, Jo. I constantly question myself about it every day. It's so tough. And I would say, do as I say and not as I do in this one, because I don't keep to my own rule all the time. But my rule is that I will always be able to be present by 5:30 every evening for Jack, and I'll have at least 2 hours with him where we will do something fun together. So even if we live next door to a park with a massive conker tree, even if it's just going outside and we have like that as our activity, then he gets to play around. We have a fun time together. We come back in, I make some tea, we have tea together. You know, even if it's just that, those 2 hours, they are sacrosanct. And I force myself to do a bit of a mental switch off and be like, this is parental time, this is me and Jack, and that's it. What it does mean is, because I've given myself those hours, it means that often I'm then putting Jack to bed and then picking up the laptop. And that is, I would say, not something that is sustainable forever. given where I am at the moment and what needs to happen in school and the kind of the pace of change that I want to see, I am doing it a bit too much. But that is my fault. I would say other people are a bit better at switching off entirely and prioritizing. I'm still learning that. I'll be totally honest. I'm still learning how to make sure that I prioritize the right things. Like I remember somebody, one of my friends who's now a head teacher, goes by the mantra, I don't know if this is going to make the recording, if it's not on fire, don't take it home. And it's now ahead. So it's just like, obviously I'm still teaching. So for me, I've got to make sure that my lessons are tip top. And so, to be honest, that's what the laptop work is at the moment, is making sure that I am modeling what excellence looks like in the classroom every day. And I feel like because my role is teaching learning, that's a no-brainer. It's a non-negotiable. But there is something about, reprioritizing so that you do get a bit of time for yourself, because I can see that if I keep going the way I'm going, there's going to be burnout there, and we can't let that happen because that's not sustainable. So yeah, I feel like I've waffled through that one, Joe, but I don't know what the correct answer is. I don't think anybody really knows. And I think it is individual. Like for me, my partner works away a lot, which adds a different element. It means that I am, for the last couple of weeks, I'm doing tea and bedtime on my own as well. And I've only got one. So if anybody's doing this with more than one child on their own, I just think you are saints. So yeah, I think you've got to find a balance that works for you. And that also might mean that it changes as well. Like I'd like to get to a point where I say to myself, my working week is just in school and I just finished everything that I need to do in school. Then maybe Sunday at 5, I check my emails and that's me. That's what I'd like to get to. That's my target. I'm not there yet. But
it's so wild, isn't it, when you think, the kind of the amount of work school leaders and school teachers up and down the country are doing at weekends, and what would happen if we all just said, let's not do that.
I know
It's scary.
It is scary. It's scary. And in my case, I can do better in terms of prioritizing and managing when to use my time most effectively. I know that I work better in the morning, so I should be prioritizing the things that are most important in the morning and not picking my laptop up at 9 and checking my emails or doing a not as good job. But then still having that guilt, being like, well, I could have had a bath or had a half glass of wine or done something that was for me, or gone to yoga. Instead, I've done a not very good job for an hour. But hopefully that will make somebody else think, I'm not gonna open my laptop at 9.
Don't open your laptop at 9. Please don't do that. Just
don't do that. Don't do it.
Don't do it. I actually timed myself doing my emails at 9 o'clock at night once, and I timed myself doing them I used to get in very early at like 6:30 in the morning, and I was like, oh, I'm literally 3 times as fast in the morning, and then I just never did my emails at night again. Just time yourself, see if it's worth it.
That's a good one. Just I don't know whether it's once you're a parent thing as well, but I feel like the level of guilt that I seem to be feeling myself, either about guilty for not doing enough or good enough work, and guilty for not spending enough time with my 3-year-old. It's just more guilt than I've ever felt before. Let's just switch off the guilt. Anyway.
Become a psychopath. That's the answer. And just finally, how do you see the next sort of 5 or 10 years of your career playing out? What do you see yourself like a career deputy head? Do you think about headship, or what's the plan?
I think, I don't know. I would like to think that I see myself as a head one day, but I'm certainly not. Sorry, I'm just going to switch off my phone because somebody's calling me. Apologies. I'll start that again. I would. Sorry. I would like to think that one day I would be ahead. but I'm not holding myself to ransom at all, with that kind of having that as a target. I think I've got so much to learn. I mean, in this new role, I'm learning every single day, and the context of this school is so different from my most recent experience in school. You know, I don't feel ready to think about something like MPQH yet. Not yet. I think in the future, yes, but I think having more than one school experience in a senior leadership role is really important. It's important to me, so I can know what success looks like for these kids and these staff compared to other schools, so that there's, because you know what works in an Oasis Academy in Oldham is not going to work at this school, and so the more opportunities I have to learn from other contexts, I think that will be my goal rather than headship, because I think the role of any senior leader is so crucial to the head. I think I'd be able to bring a lot, you know, once I've learned everything I need to learn here, and there's a lot to learn. I think it would be about putting my experience to practice in another deputy headship role, I would say.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.